If pizza was part of my lesson, I'd love school.
Welcome to the Hack Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Barnes, providing right now solutions to some of your biggest teaching and learning problems. Now, let's hack learning. Today, we are talking about making learning relevant. And that is a fantastic thing that all educators and parents should be thinking about and be excited about. We're having that conversation with Denis Sheeran, math teacher and author of Instant Relevance, Using Today's Experiences in Tomorrow's Lessons. Denis, thanks for helping us hack learning today. Tell us a bit about your teaching journey and when you learned that teaching and learning needed to be relevant to your students.
Well, good morning, Mark, and thanks for having me on the Hack Learning Podcast. It's really an honor to be here. I've listened to you, and to hear us having this conversation is pretty exciting for me. Yeah, I began teaching in 1999. I was a math teacher in Illinois, and one of the teachers who was in my department handed me some information, the worksheets and the lessons that they'd done the year before, and said, this is how we teach this class. And even as a first-year teacher back then, it just didn't feel right to pick up someone else's material and start working with it. So I started thinking about my own. How can I do this better? How can I do this more interestingly? And over the course of my 13-year teaching career in Illinois, and then in 2012, I moved to New Jersey and took on a math supervisor role. My desire to make school and make learning more interesting and matter more to my kids has just grown and grown and grown over time. And with the onset of the technology that you and I both know is available now, students have information to all types and some pretty good teaching to go along with it available to them online pretty much 24/7. So if teachers and schools continue to see themselves as the holder of the keys of knowledge like they used to be in the past, and students are quickly going to find school itself to be irrelevant. And that's really where the change needs to happen. Good teachers can create relevant experience for their students, and they use those as a conduit for their learning instead of as a follow-up to their learning. As a math teacher, I heard a lot of times from students that they hated doing word problems. But if you mentioned something that was really interesting and relevant to them at the time, you couldn't get them to stop talking about it, and they'd want to learn more and more about it. So the book, Instant Relevance, is about using our experiences today to teach those lessons tomorrow, because what matters to our kids today and to our students and to our teachers should be used to create the questions that our students want to answer. And then we can guide them through the process while accomplishing the teaching of the content and the standards for our courses.
Yeah, and I've had the pleasure of seeing an advanced copy of your book, and I really appreciate that. It's so enriching to see the stories you share, and that's what I love most about your book, Instant Relevance, is that it's real. It's a teacher's journey. It's this idea of here I am in the classroom, and I'm not just talking about getting kids excited about learning. I'm doing it, and here's what I'm doing that they enjoy. And I love some of the stories that you share. Can you share one of those with our audience?
Sure. I really like this one from the book. It's about a time when we had a snow day. One of the sections in the book is called Sudden Changes to Your Environment, and how you can use sudden changes to your environment to your advantage. And we had a snow day from school, and so I was home from school, my kids were home from school, and all the students were home from school. And a lot of teachers come back the next day and say, hey, let's try to pick up where we left off. Do you remember where we were 2 days ago before we had this snow day? Right. Instead of using that day off, that experience that you all have in common, as a way to teach something. So I had decided to go outside to clear out the snow from my driveway, and my snowblower was broken because I was lazy and didn't ever get it fixed. So I had to pick up the shovel and do the work myself. And after being out there shoveling for a while, I came inside, and my daughter said to me, wow, you were outside forever, Dad. You must have moved a ton of snow. And my wife looked at her and said, really? You really think he moved a ton of snow? Do you know what hyperbole is? And started turning it into a language lesson on exaggeration. And I looked at her and said, you know what? Maybe I did. Let's figure it out. So I sent my daughter outside with a measuring tape, and she measured the driveway and came back in, and we drew a picture of it. And she's in 6th grade at the time. So finding volume of three-dimensional solids is a 6th grade standard. Mm-hmm. Did I sit down and say, hey, today we're going to learn about the volume of a three-dimensional solid? No. I said, let's find out how much snow is in the driveway. So we started measuring. We drew a picture. And after we drew the picture, she said, I know how to find the volume of that part that's a rectangle, but I don't know how to find the volume of that other part. And it was a trapezoid. To me, that was the time when I said, Here's a formula for the volume of a trapezoid. Use it. I didn't have to teach it to her and then wait for an appropriate time for her to pick it up someday. She needed it now, so I gave it to her now, and we moved on. And as soon as she found the volume, we took a few minutes to convert it from how much snow is in my driveway to how much water is in snow in our area of the country at that time of year to how much water weighs. And it turns out I moved actually close to 3.5 tons, just over 7,000 pounds of water out of my driveway. And so as kind of a fun thing, my wife wrote a formal apology and put it on the refrigerator. So, it's one of those moments where your kids just ask a question or make a comment and you can let it go and be like, ha, 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 he must have moved a ton of snow. Or you can really turn it into an opportunity for them to answer that question and not even realize that they're doing something appropriate to their learning at the time.
And what could be more relevant than that? And I'll tell you, Dennis, being from Cleveland, that is so relevant for me and for my family. Now, I'm excited to hear that because when we get our typical 2 feet of snow sometime around December or January, I'm going to send my middle schoolers out and tell them we're going to learn some math today. Grab a shovel. So,
those two will go hand in hand. They'll go real well together.
I love that. Now, in the Heck Learning model, we have a section in every chapter called pushback. People like this because what we say is, here's some great ideas to make teaching and learning better, but people always have pushback. So let me push back a little bit on your example of making math relevant with moving snow. And you said, I didn't have to put a standard on the board. But what about some of our more traditional teachers who say, yeah, but my principal says I have to use this book and I have to put my standards on the board. Maybe we even call them learning targets. And kids walk in and they say, this is what I'm going to learn today. How can I have those kinds of traditional shackles and still make learning relevant?
That's a great question. There are definitely challenges that teachers face. One is that a lot of the textbooks and materials that they are using and have been using for a while follow that typical approach of teaching skills and ideas in that skill and idea vacuum, and then they tack on the application problem or the real world example at the end. And even not just in math, it's, we're going to learn history, we're going to learn a history timeline, but we're not going to make the connections across countries and continents that was happening in that historical time frame. And teachers with experience were trained this way. So it's really a challenge to retrain teachers away from using that delivery model. Another one of the big challenges they come with is timing. I've been asked by a lot of teachers, when will I have the time to do this? When I have to teach X, Y, Z, etc., and I have to fit all this into this curriculum in. And that teacher mindset that really needs to change to see the opportunities and connections around them as really the meat and potatoes of their lessons instead of the dessert. How can we use this to teach the content instead of hoping to find time to throw it in after the content is taught? That way, the classroom experience that the student has is relevant, and it's a relevant conversation. The student becomes a major part of the lesson, and this story is now not just optional as an enhancement. And another challenge that I hear is technology. Even though I'm in a school with a lot of technology, we're moving one-to-one in all grade levels really soon, a lot of teachers aren't. And technology is an excellent way to bring the world into your classroom. And without it, it's kind of difficult to tie the relevant world around us into our lessons. But good teachers work around that too. Those teachers take time to get to know their students' personal interests and their lives outside of school, and they involve themselves in the community. And then they'll have a bucket filled with great ways to connect with their students, including things like the snow shoveling idea. When a kid is talking about his winter job and he's out there shoveling snow, good teachers start to recognize that that's a conversation that can lead to learning.
Yeah, and you've got so much of that in instant relevance. That's the other thing. I feel like, for the people who push back on anyone listening to this episode and they're thinking, okay, yeah, this sounds nice, but I think that's what they can turn to is in instant relevance. You have lots of stories in there that don't involve technology. Sure, there's plenty of technology and there's ways to integrate it, and you say, hey, if you've got it, here's what you can do. But, you're talking about food and we're eating pizza, let's learn math. And, we're watching TV last night instead of, pushing kids aside who are talking about their favorite show. How can we bring that in and make it relevant? And I think that's one thing is educators can turn to books like this. And although it certainly doesn't read like a manual, you can really look at it and say, okay, here's something that this teacher did to make this relevant, and I can sort of plug this into my own lesson, whether it's math or English or anything else. That's the other thing I love, is that, you get people thinking, how can I take this idea and plug it into what I'm doing? So I think it's fantastic. Now, let's swing a little bit, and this is sort of from the pushback, and let's back it up. And if people are pushing back, let's say, and this is another piece of our hack learning model, we love to say, here's what you can do tomorrow to make this happen. For our listeners, Denis, tell them, no matter what they're teaching, no matter what grade I'm in, subject area, elementary, middle, high school, what could I do when I walk in tomorrow, or what mindset might I have to say, you know what, I'm going to take my lesson and I'm going to bring relevance to learning for my kids? Give us one or two things.
Sure, Mark. What's really interesting is that if a teacher sits down and says to themselves for 30 seconds, what do I think my kids care about right now? And they look at their grade band, maybe their elementary, middle, or high school, they're going to come up with something pretty quickly. And a suggestion I'll just come up with right now is there's an outside chance that many of their students watch some Olympic event in the last few days. Mm-hmm. There's major ones going on now, ones that are really pertinent to boys in their class and girls in their class. Everybody's got something that they're interested in when it comes to the Olympics. One of the sections of the book is talking about how to use national events that occur. And if they sit back and think, how can I use that to connect with my students tomorrow? I guarantee you they're going to come up with something. It might be math, where they're talking about a world record that was just broken, tracking the path of a world record, and then looking at what they can predict the next world record in that event will be in the next Olympics. It might be social studies, where you're talking about the different countries, the commentary and the social commentary that go along with the different countries being in the Olympics, and the different components of what's happened historically with countries and different boycotts of the Olympics and so on, and how that applies with what's going on now. How it even ties into our own election. Mm-hmm. There's something that our students and our teachers can sit back and say, this will create a conversation that my students will involve themselves in. And through that conversation, I can accomplish a statistics standard, or I can accomplish a social studies standard or a language arts standard. I can have my students write about this. I can have my students do an art piece about this and display how they feel about what we've been talking about in class. Once a teacher recognizes that the conversation is there to serve the learning, that the learning will help be a part of the process, then they'll start instigating more conversations. The Olympics just being a simple example of that. I think teachers could really do tomorrow, if they haven't done it yet, or actually when school starts for a lot of us, is talk to your students, either personally or through some quick surveys or through journaling. I had my students journal once a week for the first 4 weeks of class, and I gave them a few prompts the first couple weeks. And then the third and fourth, after they'd gotten to know me a little bit, it was more open. They revealed to me their interests, the band that they're in, the sports team they were trying to get into, the summer art program that they were in, and all of a sudden I knew how to access something that was very important to that kid, and even how to group the students in my classroom so that they would have common interests so that their learning would be important to them.
Oh, I love that, Denis. And I'll tell you, it's such a simple thing that we tend to overlook as educators, that we're so immersed in our own content and in pedagogy, and the idea that, school starts and we dive into our routine, that often we miss what you just said that is so important. If we get to know these kids, they're going to be more excited to learn. Plus, then it's easier for us to make learning relevant. When I know what kids are interested in, then sure, I can tap into that to engage them in learning. Sometime in the future, we'll have to get you and Jim Sturdivant on. Jim Sturdivant wrote a book called You Gotta Connect, and his book Hacking Engagement is actually in production right now. And he came to mind when I was listening to you, because you guys, it's like you were cut from the same cloth. He talks so much about that same thing, the idea that when you connect with learners, you can really do anything. You can accomplish anything. And I just wish that we could get this point across to all educators and parents too. That when you connect with kids, you've got them. And now you give them something exciting and you make it relevant to them. And man, they'll go get it. Denis, this is such a rich conversation. I could keep it going for hours, but we won't do that. We'll save a time, and maybe we'll circle back and do this again in the future.
All right.
What I would love to do is have you just share a little bit of contact information. Our listeners love to reach out to authors and connect and follow up and ask questions. So tell us the best way for someone to connect with you.
Well, probably the fastest way you'll get a response from me is if you follow me and join up on Twitter. My handle there is MathDenisNJ. That's Dennis with one N, which is a way I've been explaining my name since I could speak because everybody says two and I had to explain myself away. So MathDenisNJ. I'm in and out of Twitter more often during the day, and that's a great way to have a conversation with me live. You can visit my website, which is just DenisSheeran.com, and you can email me, simply enough, Denis@DenisSheeran.com. I also do professional development and travel to schools and talk about this idea. So you can reach out to me if you're interested in having me come and talk with your teachers or even with students, and even Skype in. It'd be great.
Well, that's fantastic, and that sounds like a workshop that I would love to be part of, because making learning relevant is so important. We cannot emphasize it enough. And the way that you are doing it with these incredible stories that people can connect to anything is just amazing. The book is Instant Relevance, Using Today's Experiences in Tomorrow's Lessons, and it is fantastic. You'll be able to find it everywhere, Amazon and other places, but of course we will link to it on our show notes page at hacklearningpodcast.com. Denis Sheeran, thanks so much for spending time with us and helping us hack learning today. As always, we continue the conversation at #HackLearning on Twitter and on the show notes page at hacklearningpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.